Chief Minister, thanks for joining us. What did you make of the election result on the weekend?
In the Territory, it showed that people want to see a vision, and they were backing bold policies and plans that deliver that, and that's what they voted for, and that's what Federal Labor delivered here. Unfortunately, obviously, we have the current government returned, so those big promises from Labor now aren't on the table, and we have to work with the new current Australian government about delivering things like the ship lift.
Well, you talk about working with that government. Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, came here during the election campaign. He described your government as the worst in the Northern Territory. I mean, what's your response to those comments from the Prime Minister?
Well, you might have noticed that Scott in every jurisdiction was prepared to go negative, and he did that here. But I've been able to get deals done with Scott. So in contrast with the previous Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, we've got the Darwin City deal done with Scott. We've got the Jabiru deal done with Scott. Obviously, I like it done quicker than what he's saying, but we've got the deal done. We've got the remote housing deal done with Scott. And that was done with Scott directly. We had to go around the then Aboriginal Affairs Minister to get that done. So we can get deals done with the current Prime Minister, and I look forward to working with Scott again.
Someone described it to me on Saturday night. The biggest winner in this election was Michael Gunner. Is that right? Your leadership's now absolutely safe until the next election?
I think it was a health check around our plan for the Territory. Federal Labor ran here very much on the same agenda that we've had for Territorians and working with them. Remote housing that puts locals in control and creates a remote economy out there. The Kakadu plans, the ship lift, adding to our promise for that money out there, and the brand new industry for Darwin and jobs. So for me, it was a chance to check again with Territorians, are we on the right track about creating those jobs for them, investing in that generational change? And the answer was yes, but there's still always work to do. There are people who did not choose Labor, and for me, it's always about how can you work for all Territorians.
It is, though, going to make your life somewhat more difficult, isn't it, having to continue to deal with the coalition government? I mean, the Kakadu plan that the coalition has is over a longer period of time. You're not going to get the $300 million for the ship lift. The remote housing deal's only for over 5 years, not 10. I mean, how much more difficult is this going to make your job leading up to next year's election, given that you're not going to get that injection that you were hoping to get from a shortened government?
We want to see a sense of urgency from the current Australian government for the Territory, and we haven't seen that to date. So we want to see the Minister for Northern Australia, assuming it's Minister Canavan again. I've got a good relationship with him, but we need to see some commitment from the current government for the ship lift. They were silent on that during the campaign. They didn't promise any money for the ship lift. This is crucial for more jobs here in the Territory, a brand new industry. We want to see that sense of urgency. So yes, in that sense, we're going to have to go to Canberra and fight for things. It's not going to be easy, but I'm more than prepared to take that fight up.
The coalition obviously ran a campaign here that was very personal against you. It attacked you, and it attacked the chaos and dysfunction that we've seen in your government in the past 6 months. You lost those 3 members just before Christmas. Even last week, we saw those text messages from Delia Laurie. I mean, what was your response to when you saw those text messages that had been sent by your former colleague, Delia Laurie?
Well, in some respects, there's a lot of white noise from people outside the government trying to destabilise the government. For me, that's not my priority. My priority is those jobs that we need to create, that crime we need to tackle. That's what we're working on as a government. There's people out there who have different agendas. That's not my agenda. And I think Territorians chose, at this election again, clear plans and policies that create jobs, and Territorians have consistently chosen that, consistently shown that they want to see a vision for Northern Australia and a party that wants to back that in, and that's what Federal Labor put on the table here in the Territory.
One of the things that's really been picked up on those from those messages was the criticism of Nicole Manison and Natasha Fyles. Natasha Fyles described as being too nasty to be a Chief Minister. The questions raised about Nicole Manison having young children and that sort of ruling her out. I mean, what did you think of those aspects of those comments?
Never would have been said about a bloke. And we talked about that in caucus that last day of Parliament on Thursday. Never would have been said about a bloke. And I think Natasha and Nicole and Eva are all fantastic ministers, all capable of doing their jobs, and should all be considered future contenders for any sort of position. To have those criticisms levelled against them was unfair and would never, ever been said about a bloke.
Just on another local issue, 6 people on the weekend at Based in the Grass at the music festival were taken to hospital. Now, St John says one of those was not drug or alcohol related. We don't know about the other 5 at this stage. But is it time for your government to look at pill testing at an event like Based in the Grass?
So we are considering what we can do to make those events safe for the kids that go, and pill testing is something we haven't ruled out, something we said we would consider, but not for this base. So it's something I'll continue to work with our Cabinet on, and we're reading through the outcomes of obviously the parliamentary committee we had into addictive behaviours. So it's something that I think we need to consider. I don't want to rush into choosing a policy who might be saying yes to drugs, but we obviously want people who go to concerts to be safe. You
would recognise, though, that there'd be a lot of parents out there who would want those pills, like would rather have a situation where people know what they're taking rather than have a situation at the moment where they could be taking anything, because I think it'd be only a very naive person to think that there are no drugs taken at a music festival. I mean, wouldn't it be better to actually have the opportunity to test those so that people at least know that what they're taking doesn't have the potential to kill them?
And that's why we said we consider it and haven't ruled it out. So obviously our current policy is to not support, and that's been based around advice from police and others about making sure we approach this in a no to drugs way, but we are not opposed to the idea and we are considering it.
Just back in the federal election result, I was looking at a map of the country yesterday, and it looked like there was Labor red in inner city Melbourne, in inner city Sydney, in inner city Brisbane, in inner city Hobart, and then all of the Northern Territory. I mean, have we become a place that's more like Brunswick than Queensland?
No, but we did get the highest Labor vote in the country. At 43%, we have the highest primary vote for Labor in the country. Now, we're not inner city Brunswick, but what we had here was a federal Labor Party that talked strongly about jobs, and we won the remote parts of the Northern Territory, I think, based around the housing plan that's real and substantive. It doesn't just provide more rooms in those communities, but provides a regional economy, jobs. So I think we spoke very much the language of the Territory going into that election, and Territorians returned that favour at the ballot box, and we are now, on the primary vote, the strongest part of the country for Labor.
Well, Bill Shorten did talk a lot about jobs when he came to the Northern Territory. He talked about a gas pipeline, $1.5 billion for gas pipelines, including one from the Beetaloo Basin to Darwin. And yet in northern Queensland, you saw Bob Brown and the anti-Adani convoy roll through there and really upset a lot of people. Is there a lesson in that for Labor?
So obviously I wasn't in Queensland, but I would say very clearly the lessons in the Territory, you've got to talk about jobs. Now, we didn't win the Queensland vote. I'd say there's a fair assessment that we didn't put the case about jobs strongly enough in Queensland. Now, for me, it's a very basic Labor value. You've got to start along these logic order. Can we get you a job? Can that job be one that pays fair wages? And will it be a safe workplace? Once that's sorted, then you win the policy arguments and everything else. But you've got to win the case around jobs first, and that's a very strong Labor value. We did that here in the Territory. Now, we didn't win the Queensland vote. There's a fair argument we didn't do that in Queensland, but you've got to win the argument around jobs.
There's a fairly rabid anti-gas, anti-coal campaign. We see it run in Queensland, but you also see it run here when it comes to the issue of fracking. Do you think fracking was an issue that people voted on the weekend? And do you think that that's going to have any effect on you coming up to the next Territory election?
I think it's a big issue for many, but in different ways. So there's definitely people out there who are worried about the environment, worried about carbon. We've got to have a plan for that, and we do. And there are people out there who are worried about jobs and making sure that we have an economy here in the Northern Territory. And I think here in the NT, we've laid out a plan that looks for both those things. How do we create industry that value adds, so has that manufacturing component? It's not just a place of raw export, but how at the same time do you have a plan for the environment? So 50-50 on renewables, a climate change policy and so on. You've got to make sure that you're doing all those things, but if you don't win the argument around jobs, you can't win the argument around everything else. It starts with making sure you look after people in the family home. If you're not sure if you can pay the bills, that is a serious set of anxiety, and you've got to make sure you look after people in their home first.
So is a 50% renewable energy target by 2030 a sensible or realistic policy here, particularly when you consider that we're paying for that gas from Blacktip until at least 2034?
Well, it stretches out the use of that Blacktip gas into the pipeline that we've built the Northern Gas Pipeline for. So, yeah, it actually has a good commercial return for us. We're going to go from 1% use of renewables here in the Territory to 10% this year. So we had no roadmap to renewables. We've brought that in this term. We're 100% reliant essentially on gas for our main centres and diesel in our remote. So we've got a plan that puts solar out in our remote communities, reduces that reliance on diesel, reduces the use of the roads, and we're seeing a move from 1% to 10% gas here in the Territory this year with a $90 million investment. That's all good outcomes for the Territory and stretches out the use of that gas.
Just finally, is this federal election and the result of this federal election, particularly here in the Northern Territory, a chance for you and your government to reset?
Always, I think any time there's an election that gives a point of reset. For me, we're 15 months out from the next territory election. This is the point in time you've got to start pivoting into what you'll take to that 2020 election. For a government, it has been an evolution of what your current policies are. For us, kids, jobs, trust. How do you work on that for Territorians? There was a bit of a health check. Federal Labor ran on our agenda. So yes, tick, but there were people who did not choose Labor. What are they after and how do we represent them better? I think you've always got to do that work.
So you've still, just one last question, you've still got a thumping majority in the Northern Territory Parliament. You've got 15 months until the next election. What are three things, given that with the state of play you can pretty much enact any policy you want to, what are the three main things that you want to get done between now and August next year?
I want to see more houses built remotely. So that plan's in place and ramping up. So for me, it's about remote Territorians getting those houses ramped up. We've got to get the ship lift out of the ground, so now we've got to go find $300 million, and we've got to make sure that turbocharging's hitting the ground, those jobs are being created as we wait for those other industries to ramp up. So it has to come back to jobs, both here in the Territory and remotely. If you don't get that sorted, then you've got problems.
Michael Gunner, thanks for your time.
Thank you.